This video is going to be about critical periods and sensitive periods. Another one of these core topics in developmental psychology. The thing about covering this is that I really kind of have to back up and talk about how we even got to the point of differentiating and discussing these two types of periods in development. So I have to go back to something called imprinting. Now, if you have ever read or watched the movies for Twilight, we are not talking about that type of imprinting. If you know, you know. What we are talking about is this phenomenon that is observed in certain animal species, particularly bird species, like ducks, geese, turkeys. There are some great examples elsewhere on YouTube. I'm going to link to some of the videos that are available in the description for the video. But with imprinting, one person who is known for studying imprinting is Konrad Lorenz, and he studied this in geese, and the little baby geese called goslings. And what this is when a bird hatches, the first moving object that they see, they start to get really interested in it and follow it around. All right. And the thing is, the first moving object that is usually seen is usually the mother. And so that's really good that they hatch and they become really interested in that mother and they follow her around, and then she can take care of them and make sure that they're safe and teach them how to be whatever species of bird that they might be. And so it's really this sort of adaptive mechanism. The thing is, what if it's not the mother that they see for the first time? And you might have seen some cartoon examples, depending on how old you are. If you are of an advanced age like myself, you might remember seeing Bugs Bunny cartoons where he saw a baby vulture when it hatched, and it thought Bugs Bunny was its mother and was following it around going, "Mother, mother." Also in Shaun the Sheep, more recently, or at least recently enough that my children, born late 2000s, my children remember watching Shaun the Sheep, and there's an episode where Shaun is playing hide and seek, and he hides in the chicken coop, and the chicks hatch, and instead of seeing Mama Chicken, they see Shaun, and they start following him around, and they have to solve the issue of how to get the chicks to stop following Shaun and to start following their mom. All right, so those are some cartoon examples. Other examples, Lorenz actually got the goslings to follow him around. There are pictures of him like walking around campus, I believe. It might be a false memory. It might not be the college campus, but him walking around with this line of goslings following behind, and pictures of him swimming in a pond, basically saying, "Hey, I got to show you how to swim because you're imprinted on me. I gotta do the mom stuff. I got to do the caregiver stuff." There's also a great video that is available from the BBC on YouTube, and I'm going to link it in the description, of an experiment where they had turkeys imprint on a human. It looks like it was a human farmer, I believe, if I remember that correctly. All right, so imprinting. This is an immediate thing. There's a definite time window. There's a certain window of time. You have to see a moving object, and bam, imprinting has happened. All right, this idea of imprinting led us to wonder about similar sort of set, determined time frames for development that might exist in other species like humans. And imprinting is an example, I have hair on my face. Imprinting is an example of a critical period. What is a critical period? This is a period of time that is a very rigidly set, rigidly determined window of time where a certain experience has to happen for development to take place. All right, so it's not optional. Something has to happen to the person. Something in the environment has to be presented to the individual. I said the person earlier, we're talking about other species, that member of the species. All right, so something has to happen for the development to occur. It's an either-or situation. There is no flexibility with a critical period. Now, with humans, some of the things that have critical periods in other species, they don't really hold up as critical periods in humans. And so we have this idea of a sensitive period. A sensitive period is a period of time where it is best for an experience to happen, for a development to occur. For development to occur, there's a certain optimal time frame. All right. So there's more flexibility with a sensitive period. A sensitive period is not either or. A sensitive period is the best time. A critical period is the only time for an experience to happen. So let's give you some examples. All right, so using the imprinting example. All right, imprinting, critical period. Do we have a critical period for anything like imprinting in humans? Well, we don't really imprint. We have bonding. You might have heard of the term bonding that we use when we talk about animals. And you might have heard the idea, I've seen this in various movies and TV shows, they will mention the idea that the human infant bonds with their caregiver within minutes of childbirth. That's a great idea, but it's false. That is actually not true, and it almost seems to be inspired by imprinting. We don't have that. When we talk about human bonding, we use the term attachment. All right, human attachment, does that form instantaneously? As a parent, I can tell you no. Wouldn't life be so much easier if attachment formed instantaneously? And what about people who are adopted later, who are adopted not as infants? Can they form an attachment with their adoptive parent, their caregiver? Well, yeah, they can. All right, so we don't really have a critical period for human attachment. We do know from research that the optimal time for developing an attachment for humans is in the first 6 months. The best, easiest time to develop an attachment is in the first 6 months. This is why when you adopt someone who is older than 6 months, if you're working with a good agency that knows what's going on, or if you, maybe you are in counseling, you've already done some education and some counseling to try to get ready for the role, one thing that they should warn that adoptive caregiver about is, hey, you might have to work a little harder to develop attachment because you're outside of the sensitive period. Right? So when you're outside of the sensitive period, it is not impossible for the development to occur. It's just harder. All right. So it's harder. It's more difficult. It's much easier if you do it in the sensitive period. Now, another example, because we like multiple examples. Let's talk about language development. All right. We do have some evidence that if you don't hear spoken language at all before about age 7, now we do have limited evidence because most people do, all right, but we do have evidence supporting the idea that you have to hear human language at all before about age 7, or you will not learn to speak, all right? So that is an example of a critical period. Now, other aspects of language development fit much better with a sensitive period. So if you've ever had to learn a second language, depending on when you did that, it might have been much easier or much more difficult than otherwise. All right. So if you learn a second language early in life, it is much easier than if you learn it later. We also have some evidence that having an accent, when you learn another language or move to a different area that has a different regional accent, that if you move earlier in life, there'd be 5-7 years between the first 5-7 years of life, you're less likely to have an accent. All right, so we have some evidence in language, a lot of sensitive period sort of stuff with learning a language, not so much critical period, but we may have a critical period for learning how to speak, learning how to use spoken human language at all. All right, so those are just a few examples. All right, but hopefully this helps you understand the difference between a critical period and a sensitive period. And if you want to learn more information, particularly about imprinting, I am going to link to some other resources in the description.